This week's presentation is whitewater rafting on the Salmon River in Idaho. The Salmon River is also known as the River of No Return. The area is a dry mountainous desert, remote from civilization, but it also has a rugged beauty and has played a role in American history. She has camped on the sand spits that resulted from 19th century mining in the region. Fran has seen cougar tracks in the sand and rock houses built by the Chinese miners.
In the summer of 2014, most of you know that probably my favorite outdoor activity is kayaking. And in the summer of 2014, I had made plans to do some kayaking trips and some kayaking classes. And my sister, who lives in Texas, called me up and said, hey, John and I, her partner, we're going to do this whitewater rafting thing on the Salmon River in Idaho, and we want you to come. And they had it scheduled at a time that I had something else scheduled, another kayaking thing. And I went, geez, I can't, that's not gonna work. And as it turned out, you know, the trip that they were wanting to do, there weren't enough people to do it. So she kept calling and bugging me and finally, and sending me eye candy type pictures like some of these. And finally I said, okay. And I called up, and as soon as I signed up, they said, well, we can do this trip on the Salmon River. We're going to be stuck with the Snake River, but we can do this trip that's mostly on the Salmon River, but it'll be a really small group. So there were the three of us and a woman who worked for the outfitter and her partner. And then at the last minute, a family of four from Austin, Minnesota. The man worked for Hormel. And their two college-age sons, he and his wife and their two college-age sons joined up. And so we had a really small group, 9 of us plus 3 guides, which made for a pretty exciting trip. So I flew out, we met up, we went and we met our group on a Sunday evening in a hotel in where we were meeting up, Lewiston, and we met up there and we talked about the trip planning, and they gave us dry bags and they said, be ready to go at 7:30 tomorrow morning. So that's what we did. We drove a couple of hours to a place called Whitewater where we were going to launch. Let me show you a map of the Salmon River. We actually, I think you can all see my cursor. We actually launched after where the Middle Fork comes into the main river. And we followed the Salmon to where it joins the Snake, which goes along the border between Idaho and Oregon and between Idaho and Washington, and then we got out at Lewiston, and this was Monday through Friday. But before we actually went to the river, they wanted us to know some about the area. So this is, it's a really remote area, incredibly remote. I've been a lot of pretty remote places camping. This was as remote as some of the places I've been, you know, in remote areas of Canadian Lake Superior or in Mexico in Baja. We didn't see other people the whole time, except one other rafting group that occasionally passed us, but that was it. So, but first we went to this cultural center for the Nez Perce Indians who had been in this area. They at one point controlled millions and millions of acres. And in 1855, a treaty was set up, which didn't work to their advantage very well, because it made them go down from to only 10% of the 7.5 million acres that they had controlled up to that point. And so they had to be in this smaller area. You can see how it got smaller over time. And then In 1860, gold was discovered in the area, in the mountains along the Salmon River. And all of a sudden, they were pressured into controlling even less. And a new treaty was pushed on them, which cut down that whole area that they already had by like 90%. Okay. So it was incredibly reduced. People weren't happy. Initially, they weren't forced to all go on a single reservation, but then in 1877, they were given 30 days to relocate. And as you can imagine, some of them were pretty angry. Chief Joseph, who was the chief, wanted to kind of try to see if things could be worked out. Unfortunately, what happened, well, it probably wouldn't have been worked out. But there were some young tribe members who were really, really ticked off about this and attacked some homesteads. And then a war started. And basically, there were battles, but the Nez Perce Indians went on a 126-day journey. They traveled more than 1,170 miles across 4 states. And finally, they lost the last battle and were captured 40 miles south of Canada. They were trying to get into Canada. They had traveled through Montana and Idaho and Oregon and Washington through, or no, Wyoming and Montana through all of this. And they were captured. And they had thought that, well, they'd be forced to be on the reservation. No, many of them were sent to Fort Leavenworth to ride out the winter, and then were sent to Oklahoma, which was really not like what they were used to. No mountains, no springs, no running water, and it was hot. In 1885, many of them were allowed to return from Oklahoma up to the Pacific Northwest. Some of them returned to the reservation in Idaho. However, there was a lot of pressure if you were going to be on that reservation to be Christian. And if you didn't want to be Christian, then you ended up being in a separate area in Washington. And so the tribe was pretty decimated by all of this. However, many of them have kept their cultural history. There are cultural centers actually throughout Idaho, and it was quite fascinating. So we visited this. And one of the things that was most impressive about it was they traveled through some of the remote regions that we were in. They knew them better. They were able to get through them better. But I couldn't imagine it. And as you see the pictures, it'll probably blow you away too. This is Whitebird. You can see the salmon in the distance, the Salmon River. This is where the first battle, the Battle of Whitebird, happened in those battles and in their fleeing the soldiers. So a little bit of context. Interestingly, up in the mountains, they built these houses into the ground, which helped for climate control, and then they built, they covered the roofs. This was an example of it that they had as a demo thing by the museum that we went to. So then we left the museum and prepared to go into those same waters, the Salmon River. Here we are on the bus, getting off the bus with our stuff, hearing a little bit about safety stuff, what to do if you flip, how to ride, how to paddle, things like that. Some people had gone ahead. Two guides had gone ahead and had put air in the rafts. We had several different kinds of rafts. We had a gear raft that took a whole lot of our stuff. We had something that was called the Princess Raft here in the middle, which was set up so that people could actually sit on a whole lot of padded area and not do anything and just ride if they wanted to. We also had a paddle raft. Well, let me show you what happened on the Princess Raft. Oops. Oh, that's the gear, a better shot of the gear raft. The Princess Raft, if you read the Princess Raft, you just sat in the front and rode, and you could take pictures and get splashed, but but it was hugely stable and loaded down with gear. The Princess Raft and the Gear Raft and the Paddle Raft all had oars, and each of the guides managed the oars on those boats. But you had to paddle if you were in the Paddle Raft. And there were also, here you can see, in the background, you can see two little one-person inflatable kayaks. We call them the duckies. And so we had options, and we traded in and out of different boats. If you didn't want to do anything, you could be in the Princess boat. If you wanted to do it all on your own, you could be in one of the duckies, or you could be on the Paddle Raft. So we loaded up stuff, we got on the water and headed out. It was really hot. It was August. And as you can see, here we are at lunch the first day, sitting on a sand spit, and it is hot. The sun is beating down. I used a whole lot of sunscreen. We wore hats. We did a lot to kind of protect ourselves from the sun. And at the same time, it was hot. The water temperatures were probably low 70s. And so the water felt real refreshing. And starting with the first day, we were in rapids. This is a shot that I took. Actually, I was in the paddle raft. I was supposed to be paddling, but I got a shot of the rapids that we were heading into, which is pretty exciting. One of the first canyons we went through is called Green Canyon. I've looked at pictures of it on the internet, and it's much greener than this on the internet. I think they took the pictures in the early summer because it was not very green to me. Here, I think we're stopping for the first day. And we hiked. You could hike up because this is a mountainous kind of desert, and you could hike way, way up and get views of the river and get views of the campground. Because we were a small group, usually they send they send two people ahead, each with a gear raft, two guides ahead, and they actually set up your tents for you, which seems kind of swanky and silly to me. They told us because they only had one gear boat and they only had 3 guides, they all stayed together. And so they told us that they would set up our tents for us if we wanted them to, but nobody did. Everybody thought that was silly. We set up our tents on these incredible sand spits. Actually, the description, it's the sand spits are not there because of the mining. They're there because this part of the Salmon River is a drop and pool kind of river. So sections of rapids followed by calmer sections. And what happens is that sand builds up and creates these incredible sand spits, which were just awesome to camp on. They treated us pretty well, even if we did set up our own tents. We had dinner at tables. The guides fixed dinner. There were hors d'oeuvres when we first landed while everything was getting set up. They had chairs that you could have half in the water and sit with your feet in the water and have an adult beverage if you wanted to. It was pretty sweet. The food was awesome, and it was all pretty sweet. Rafts allow you to bring a whole lot of stuff, and they had big coolers. They brought wine and beer, and you could bring some of your own as long as it wasn't, as long as you put it in their coolers. And so it was pretty swank. The next day, we're back on the water, and there's more rapids. And some sections were just really gorgeous, and some sections were pretty flat. I took a lot of pictures, and some sections, then you'd head into the rapids and have a little bit of excitement and fun and get splashed a bit. When we stopped on this particular day, one of the things we did is we saw these rock houses. I think that you probably think well, they look a little bit like this Native American things, but actually, Chinese miners came into the area after gold was discovered, and they probably did take over some of the things that the Native Americans had used, or built on the idea themselves. And they built these rock shelters, and this is the remains of one of the rock shelters that we hiked up to. By the time that gold was discovered along the Salmon and in Idaho, lots of people had flooded to California, and Chinese immigrants were not able to get good stakes in California, and so they went further. You didn't quite get as much gold. It was a lot more rougher existence. There was a lot less civilization, but a lot of miners came from China, and they built these rock house kinds of things. As you can see, the sand is just incredible and pretty rough and remote. It was cool to get up at sunrise and see the sunrise, and the scenery is quite amazing. I kind of feel like when I go through my pictures, it's like all eye candy. This is one of the areas that's more of the pool kinds. You can float, you don't have to work. In fact, being a sea kayaker and used to paddling, having to paddle all the time, people kept telling me that I was working too hard when I was in the ducky and I would just paddle. Most of the time we were floating. They used the oars to help steer, and then you used the oars and paddles and worked harder when you went through the rapids. We went through another canyon called Cougar Canyon. Here you can see, again, put your tent, and they had given us these big backpack dry bags. They provided all of our gear pretty much. They told us we needed to be able to fit our gear into a medium-sized kind of dry bag, and then we had a little dry bag for daytime stuff, for snacks or sunscreen or stuff like that. They provided these sleeping bags. They weren't like the sleeping bags they used. They were kind of big. They weren't particularly warm, but you didn't need them to be warm. The tents were pretty big and airy, which was nice because it was pretty warm. So they pretty much provided just about everything that you could want. Cougar Canyon was well named. We set up our tents by where we'd seen cougar tracks, which was, because they'd been through the whole sand spit, but they were really staying away from us. They weren't interested in us. They had just cruised through. Every place that we could, we would hike up high and get a view. Because the terrain was so high, and in places the river was narrow, you can see, even though it stayed light fairly late, the shadows would come up, which was nice because it helped to cool things off a little bit. I know that we've had a couple of people talk about columnar basalt. And you see that at the Giant's Causeway in Ireland, and I've seen it on Lake Superior up in Canada. But there's also some of this along the Salmon River. That's pretty amazing. Here again, looking down, there are duckies, our paddle boat, our paddle raft, our princess raft, and the gear raft. They had all kinds of things for us to do for fun, including one day we took one morning we took one of the rafts. I think we used the paddle raft, and we flipped it over, and we threw buckets of water on it, just as people would run down the beach and then slide down it like a slip and slide into the river. That's pretty fun. You can also see the setup here. On the lower left is the dinner table. They had plenty of water. We consumed a lot of water, which was important, as well as over here, the cooking area. One of the things that was really important and that they emphasized and talked to us about from day one was leave no trace. That meant, and I don't have it showing up in any of the pictures, that meant that we used a groover and carried out our solid waste. It was interesting at the end because a lot of rafting companies, I mean, they all have to do that. And there's a place near Lewiston, which is where everyone takes their solid waste and the company processes it and disposes of it. You can also see here, you know, while having hors d'oeuvres, we'd sit with tables and chairs kind of a little bit in the water and just watch the river. As it went on, we had a little bit more intense rapids. This is in a section called Blue Canyon. I was in a ducky on that section, and I am here. I'm trying to head for the rapids. I did flip because, you know, that darn little inflatable raft doesn't maneuver like the kayaks that I'm used to. And I didn't get the right line on it, and I went over. But it was all good. You know, you get your feet up, you sit back and float through, and then you come out and you're fine. Here we are after landing, playing in the water, walking around the beach. This lady here in the pink top, she was from a family from Austin, Minnesota. And prior to this trip, she had never slept in a tent before. Her husband and her college-age sons were pretty adventurous, and every year one of them would plan their vacation. And she knew her oldest son was a senior in college. She knew this might be the last family vacation they had together. She was in charge of planning it, and she picked this because she thought it would be cool. Her husband and her sons would love it. And in fact, they did. And in fact, she paddled one of the duckies through some rapids, and she really rocked it for somebody who was a total newbie and was actually a little bit nervous coming into it. So go Bess, she really rocked it. Here we are coming on more rapids. You soon lose kind of track of time being in this remote place, getting up, paddling. You guys all know what it's like when you're out in the wilderness and doing a journey like this. Here we go through more rapids. And the scenery was just stunning. One place, there's a creek that comes into the main river, and you can climb up and stand in water that's coming down. Here I am with my sister who persuaded me to do this, standing in the waterfalls. Felt pretty good. And at the end of the day, it was nice. Another fun thing that we did, one place, and I know I have pictures of it, but I couldn't find it. There was a place where it was safe to jump off the cliffs into the water, where the water is quite deep. And so we all did some cliff jumping from cliffs that were probably, easily 20 to 25 feet up off the water. And you just ran out and jumped in. We all wore PFDs and sandals or whatever to protect their feet. But that was really fun too. The last night, one of the things that they did is they had a special dinner, and they pulled out these bags of stuff that they got from a secondhand store, costume stuff. And they told us that we had to dress for dinner. So we all dressed in costumes. Those are pictures I can't find either. This here is my brother-in-law, John. And then this is Jonah. He was our lead guide. And actually you can't see it, but he's wearing these billowy pants. This is the last day that he had worn at the last dinner, the crazy outfit he'd worn at the last dinner. The last day, because it was August, there were places where the river was lower, and we spent more time. There's not much in terms of rapids, and we're in the Snake River at this point. And we rafted all the rafts up together, and then had a little motor and motored through it to get through to the end. And so there's Jonah leading us on our way. Like I say, the scenery was just stunning. And here we are at our last lunch, and my brother-in-law John is cooling off, standing in the water. This is the Snake River where we are. And so then we landed. We landed on Friday afternoon, and we this is a view up from the Snake, and this is a view as we were headed back, looking back down at the river. We stopped and dropped off our solid waste, and we went back into Lewiston, and we had a big dinner and partied and stayed the night in Lewiston. And then I went with my my sister and brother-in-law back to Coeur d'Alene, Iowa, where his mother was. So that was the trip. I looked at the outfitter that I used was called Row Adventures. You heard a little bit about them when Stephanie and Paul were talking about their trip in Cuba. Row Adventures went to Cuba, and they do things in a lot of different areas. A lot of it's not all rafting and kayaking, but a lot of it has to do with that. They have openings yet this summer to do this very same trip. The cost for the week-long trip, which included all the food, which included wine with dinner, they allotted 2 beers and 2 cans of pop a day for people, and people could bring more if they wanted it. They provided all of the equipment and gear. The guides were very good, and we learned a lot about some of the history of the area. And having never been to Idaho or any of this area before, that was quite interesting to me. The price that they're doing it for, because I know some people might be interested, is $1,690. They have some that are family friendly. Kids are a little bit cheaper. They're $1,590. And like I say, they provide, you don't really need much of anything except bathing suit and clothes to wear and hats and sunscreen and like that. So it was pretty cool. So that was my whitewater rafting trip in Idaho. I'll stop sharing and open it up for questions.
Fran, this is Melissa. Where were you on your kayaking skills back, like 7 years ago?
Where was I on my kayaking skills?
Yeah, how long had you been kayaking when you went on this trip? Because
well, I had been kayaking for about 5 years. In fact, I bailed on taking a BC 3-star class.
Oh, wow.
That was what I had signed up for that I bailed on. I wouldn't have gotten my 3-star there. I wasn't that good, but I bailed on taking that class when I decided to go, when my sister convinced me to go to Idaho.
So you had a lot of experience and felt comfortable. It sounds like you felt comfortable.
I did feel comfortable, but and my sister and brother-in-law are both comfortable in the water. The woman from Austin, Minnesota,
yeah,
she hadn't ever done anything like this before. She had never spent the night in a tent, and she did great. She was fine.
Okay.
And they allow kids to come on some. They have some trips that are reserved for adults, because not all
Yeah.
adults want kids on them.
Yeah.
But they have kids go on trips. They have to be a certain age and you have to be their parents, and but yeah,
Okay.
they probably
I
wouldn't put them in Ducky, but
I did the whole salmon last summer, so it was fun to hear you were going to do this, and it's fun to see pictures because I'm just remembering stuff.
I bet it was awesome.
It was awesome. It was awesome. Yeah.
Fran, I have a question.
Sure.
I don't know how to raise my hand here. But anyway, my question is about the water levels. On some of those first slides that you had, it looked like the water levels were really, really, really down. And I'm wondering if those truly were water lines, or whether there were, did you get a sense of what was a typical water level there?
The water levels were down. It was towards the end of August. The water levels are much higher in the spring and early summer because of snow melt and all of that and flooding. And in fact, they don't do this stuff until you get into June a little bit, because it's too high. So yeah, this is the only time I've done it, and so I don't have an overall sense. It was certainly all doable the whole way. We didn't drag through,
Sure. And they didn't talk about it being unusually low or anything.
No, they said it was lower because it was August, and that also was part of the reason that, and we dithered around, and we did, that we didn't cover quite as much by the end, but yeah.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Several years before, and it doesn't show up very well in the pictures that I had, there was a real serious fire there. And one of their guides had a group out during the fire, and you could still see some of the results and damage from that in some areas. That struck me as the most scary thing about it.
Of all the places you've been, do you have a favorite? It's like the child you love best.
It would be really hard for me to pick one. I mean, there are a number that stand out, Canadian Lake Superior, Baja, New Zealand, but this stands out among those. And it was a different kind of trip though, because it was rafting and not kayaking, but.
Yeah. Good point.
Melissa.
Yeah.
Somebody is asking if you used an outfitter too.
I did, and I used oars. I used oars because I wanted to go for as long as I could, and the trip I did was middle, main, and lower, and I think it was at least 2 weeks. And oars is big and goes lots of places, like Row does. And I'm actually using them to go on the Green and Colorado River in September. So I used oars, and they do a lot besides kayaking. They do other stuff too, and they do some international. Yeah,
I think both of these are really pretty reputable outfitters, and they have good guides. They treat people well. They do different kinds of trips in different kinds of places. One of the things that blew me away is that the next 2 years on my birthday, I got a birthday card from them with pictures of me paddling, which kind of blew me away. So,
yeah, no kidding.
But
fun.
But yeah. Was anybody fishing? Nobody fished. There were fish I would assume you could fish, but nobody fished. Along with that, the reason it was called the River of No Return is because people who went down it, like in the 19th century, they couldn't go back. And at the bottom, I mean, some of them, they would dismantle their wooden boats and make something else out of it because they weren't going back up. So,
Okay, well, this is Rob. I'll relate a quick story on a very similar trip. I got introduced to the Groover as well on one of these trips. And for everyone who missed it, that's kind of a little bucket potty that you bring around and they set up in the woods or wherever so that people can go. So they had asked us if we minded not, they would put a tarp around it for privacy if you wanted, but we had one that was kind of remote and they asked everyone, everybody said, yeah, that's fine. You don't need to put the tarp up. So one morning I'm there doing my morning constitution and I hear some people, another river raft trip coming down. And I realized here I am in all my glory, waving to people, hello, hello. And, you know, they could see my knees, whatever. It was just, I had to get the mental shift going. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can really sit here and do this and wave to people at the same time. That's my little 2 cents.
One of the outfitters in the Grand Canyon put together a calendar of the best Groover pictures, the best Groover views on the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. This is what you see where they set up the Groover. It was pretty funny.
we had ours did have a little 3-sided tent around it and then had a view of the river. So it wouldn't have protected us from people paddling by. But there was hardly anybody paddling by. There was hardly anybody at all. And they had an ammo box full of reading material. And they had, like I say, they had everything all set up to take care of you. It's pretty fun.
You know, it's interesting that you didn't have a lot of people on the river with you in August, because when I went last year, we did have people. I mean, we weren't the only ones on the river. So I wonder, that's interesting.
There was one other group from Row, and it was a big group, but I think they were doing the Snake River. I think they were, and we met up with them when we got on the Snake River on the last day. Okay. And then we occasionally saw one other group go by where we were, but I think this was like their last trip of the season. It was right before Labor Day.
Oh.
And so I guess we just timed it right in a lot of ways. And it was pretty cool to have a much smaller group because some of their groups are a lot bigger.
Yes. Yeah.
You say this was the Snake River?
It was the Salmon River, and then the last stretch was the Snake River.
Okay.
It was the lower Salmon River. Melissa did the Middle Fork and then into this, I think. The Middle Fork is well known for super intense rapids, but this was just it was stunning.
The Middle Fork is stunning as well. It's got a lot, at least based on the pictures you had, Fran. The Middle Fork is a lot more ponderosa pine trees, and it's just a different environment, but it's beautiful as well. The whole river is gorgeous.
Okay. So the question is, would I select a different time if I tried it again?
Oh.
I don't know. Often when I do these things, I do them around other things that I'm doing, and so it would depend. But I did, when I went to their website and I saw that they had spots open on trips in July and August, I found myself tempted, although I'm not in a position to do that this year. But I know that would be fun. Trip cost. I said something about that, but it was I think I can't remember what it cost then. Right now you can do that trip for $1,690. Now you have to fly out there. They don't cover the night at the beginning and the night at the end in the hotel. you know, and so there are additional expenses. But during the trip, all of the food is covered. Adult beverages are covered. You know, they provide all of the gear, and so really, it's so that's pretty much inclusive.
We were surprised at the end of ours to find that the recommended tip for the guides was something like $10 per person per day.
Oh yeah,
So we
that's
didn't give them that much, but you know,
That's
we
right.
had a family going, so it was like, that's a lot
That's
to
right.
fork over.
We did tip the
Yeah.
guides, and a lot of times outfitters, and I've seen it different places also, you know, because I do kayak things sometimes with outfitters. Yeah. So yeah, you should factor in tips for the guides.
In the lull, I'll just say another thing our guides did, and I don't remember what outfitters we used, but they had a little cooler that we were lugging along everywhere. It was duct taped shut, and you could sit on it, and we just kept lugging it along. And like on the third or fourth night, they busted it open, and there was actually frozen ice cream in there. We enjoyed that on a super hot day. We tried to recreate that in Michigan, and it did not work. I think you need a lot more dry ice than I purchased.
Yeah.
Rob, were you guys on the Salmon or somewhere else? What river?
We did the green one year and we did the snake another year. And I
Okay.
remember there was greenery on the Snake River and snakes on the Green River. They actually, they allowed us, some of the guides were just sleeping on a sand beach, and they said, if you want to join us, you may. So we kind of all lined up. It was a slopey beach, so feet towards the water, heads towards the shore. And when we woke up in the morning, there was little lines down between us. And we're going, where did those come from? Oh, those were snakes going down. Had I known that was my fate, I would not have chosen to sleep out there. And it turns out that one of the guides had gotten up to relieve himself. And when he came back to his sleeping bag, fortunately, he flashed on the sleeping bag in time to see the snake's tail going into his bag. Yeah. So, but he casually turned it around and dumped the snake out and got back in his bag.
Huh.
Yeah, they're attracted to heat, right? Snakes.
I can't say for sure.
All right. Any other questions or comments about Fran's presentation?
It was great.
Yeah, thank you, Fran.
Thank you, Fran.
Thanks, you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Fran.
I liked it.